My name is Ryan. I am one of the sales engineers from down under in Australia. I also realise that I'm the only thing standing between you and a beer or maybe a power nap before dinner. Take your pick. I won't be offended if you run off. I might make you skip down the hallway, but maybe we'll see how we go. We'll try and get through this as quick as possible. I do want to get you out of here so you can experience the rest of the conference. These are always amazingly consumable after the fact, and if you have seen any of my previous sessions, you'll probably notice that I like to make them very visually consuming and provide a lot of kind of post-event content. So it's not going to be a death by PowerPoint. There's not just white text and bullet points and things like that. So the obligatory I can say whatever I want and get away with it statement. There are 5 Australian SEs presenting at .conf this week, and we are all scheduled on at the exact same time. So we're going to get a group FaceTime happening, but we didn't get a chance to do that. So I've saved you from 4 rowdy Australians as well. A million data points about myself. As I said, I'm from lovely Australia. It is a very long flight. I'm still recovering. I've been with Splunk. This is my 4th year, which in most places isn't that long, all things considered. But in a place like Splunk, amusingly, I have been here longer than 2/3 of the company. So 3 full years, and I'm in that top 30% of our tenured employees. So it shows you the growth that Splunk has, especially in the last couple of years. My background is in cybersecurity. If you saw any of the sessions from last year, downloaded the content, I presented a session similar to this. It was one session, and I basically tried to cram as much as I possibly could into a 45-minute slot. Everything Azure and Office 365, from security, from IT ops to a bit of fundamentals, that content is still out there and available, and I recommend that you go and check it out. This year, I tried to tempt fate a little. I now have 3 sessions to present. I'm regretting that horribly. Maybe not come Thursday. But this is one of 3. So this is the IT operations session focused on monitoring performance and things like that, specifically around Azure and Office 365. There is the security session tomorrow. There is also a fundamentals track that I'm presenting with a very good friend of mine, Jason Conger. So if you've seen anything on Splunk base, typically to do with Azure and Office 365, chances it's got his name all over it or my name somewhere close to it. So if you have any questions, come and see me afterwards, attend the other tracks, download the one from last year. This is kind of a flow on into that. I did a heap of work with Boss of the SOC. So if you were at Boss of the SOC last night and saw any of the cloud infrastructure, Azure AD, any of that, that was me. Sorry if that was painful in some of those questions. I did do it on purpose. I'm a big fan of obstacle course races. I stood on stage last year in this very spot with a broken shoulder after dislocating both at the same time. Was not a pleasant experience. And you'll never see a dashboard with me with a pie chart on it. I maintain my rage for pie charts. The rest of the organisation now gives me shit for it. They think it's a great joke. It's not. As I said, I used to be a customer, so working in cybersecurity for public and private sector for a number of years, and crossed over to the dark side, and now I drink the Kool-Aid for Splunk. So as I said, there is not, we're not going to go really, really wide. We're going to focus on some really key things that we haven't kind of seen too much of in the IT ops space around Splunk specifically. The great thing is that there is a heap of content now, and especially in the next coming days that you'll see, that is going to be really beneficial to you guys if you're focused on that infrastructure performance monitoring side of cloud-based services like Microsoft. One of the key things to note, I guess, is this deck is completely Microsoft and Azure and Office 365 focused, but realistically, some of these foundational concepts could be repeated, right? So whether it's AWS, GCP, or Alibaba if you like to live on the edge, those use cases and those requirements are kind of universally transferable. So back to basics for 2.5 seconds. What's the difference? On-premise, as it suggests, you own everything, all the way from the rack and cooling through to the tin, through to the hard drives, through to the support, maintenance, the application, the OS, the whole shebang, all the way through to the top layer. You also own all of the rage if something goes wrong. Infrastructure as a service, so IaaS, as it suggests, as it sounds, is hosted services up to that OS layer. So Azure, as you would expect, AWS, whoever else it might be, provide you the kit and the capability to provision, choose your operating system, choose your own adventure, what you want to run on it. You are responsible for patching, you are responsible for accounts all the way through. Platform as a service, PaaS, a little bit further up that stack again. So you choose what application, what you want to run and how you want to configure it, and what data you want to put into it. The rest is controlled by your vendor, or in this case, Microsoft. So your trade-off is the further up this stack you go, the less potential visibility that you might have, but at the same time, the responsibility and risk is potentially pushed out to the other side. And finally, we've got Office 365, which is Microsoft's full SaaS workflow, mobility, collaboration suite, which is completely SaaS. So you put your data in, and that is basically all you have to do. You've got no visibility or limited visibility into potential outages, potential issues. If I say Exchange Online, message tracking logs, I might trigger a few people. But things like that where you have no access to transport servers and logs in, detailed logs on that back end of that sort of infrastructure. You've probably seen this screen before. I actually stole this from a Microsoft person, so hopefully there's not too many or any in the room. But as I said, we're going to focus on Azure first and then dig into Office 365. So if you've ever sat in a Microsoft sales meeting or you've done a little bit of Googling online, this is basically how Azure is presented to a customer. It's nice and logical and straightforward. We've got our platform services at the top, we've got our infrastructure services. It's kind of well defined and how it's put together and options into that platform and that landscape. That looks great, and it is, but in reality, that's kind of what you've got access to. So that's what you buy when you sign on the dotted line. When you log into Azure, that is everything that you've got access to. Can't read it by design, but there is that many, and I just tried to fit them on a page for you. So that changes day to day because they're always bringing out new capabilities and new features and additional endpoints and monitoring requirements and little things like that. It is what it is, right? That is the name of the game that we live in, right? Everything is evergreen and current and always evolving and always changing. So if I refresh that view, there'd be another 10 things on there tomorrow. So the general question that we typically get is, where do I start? And it is not meant to be as simple as it sounds, because if I asked every single person in the room what your key requirement is or what your pain point is or where you want to start, everyone's would be different. There would be some common stories, but the requirements are going to change depending on your organization, your vertical, audit requirements, retention requirements, things like that. So what we really want to do is keep it really, really simple, bring it all the way back down to a couple of really core fundamental components. So as I said, you could go through this deck, find, replace Microsoft with AWS or your organization name, because this visibility is not something that is just cloud specific, right? So these are things that, regardless of where your environment lives, these are the things that we think that you should ideally be focusing your attention to. Access and identity, nothing in your organization happens without some sort of authentication or user identity. that is kind of as trivial as it sounds, right? Someone has to interact with a device, whether it's a security requirement, whether it's a monitoring requirement. You've got service accounts, you've got monitoring tools. Everything is a handshake type of connection. And if it's just free for all, then we probably should be having a much detailed conversation. Network, knowing how traffic is traversing across your network is just as important. What your baseline looks like. If I've got multi-data centers, how frequently should data be traversing that network? Should it be this fast? Should it be this backup at this particular time? Knowing that baseline exists and what my day-to-day looks like means that I can better pick up anomalies and changes in my environment. If I've got 50 incidents that get raised overnight, being able to see this is what it looked like yesterday, this is what it looks like overnight, this is what it looks like this morning, where my delta is and what is potentially going wrong. Infrastructure, knowing assets is half the battle. I won't say CMDB, it's a dirty word. Does it even exist? Has anyone actually got proper CMDB? No? It's all good. It's an interesting conversation that I particularly have with customers back home. There is typically some legacy thinking around, I need to know assets, I need to know exactly what they are, who owns them, all that typical relational data tied to a particular device or asset and things like that. Where it gets interesting is where you throw in the mix things like microservices and containers and PaaS and SaaS solutions, where those types of assets or entities might exist for a minute or a day or a week, and then they're gone. And how you then tie that through something like Splunk as a monitoring solution and your incident management change record, ServiceNow or BMC Remedy, how you change that through your incident response capability, how you change that through your business analytics and the rest of those things. So maintaining that view of the world is equally important, and if you've got to do those things manually and you don't know what you're looking for, then it can be incredibly painful. The last one, usage and consumption. This is more focused around your cloud adoption. Everyone's got a cloud strategy, whether it's detailed, whether it's not. Splunk had a cloud strategy very early on. Cloud was all the rage. We lifted and shifted a bunch of stuff. What is the impact? Is it actually better? Am I saving money by lifting and shifting or redeploying that into the cloud? More often than not, we just do it or we build fresh in there, but how many times do we actually go back and go, look, this is the cost-benefit analysis and this cost me less to do here, so therefore it's more beneficial to bring things back. And that's what Splunk did. We brought a couple of services back in-house because it was actually cheaper for us to run it ourselves. When we draw the bow between those core data sources and those valuable data sources, linking that through Azure, so we've got Azure Active Directory, as I said, all of those identities living in Azure, whether you're Azure AD Connect or however you got your environment configured, being able to see those authentication attempts and those pairings all the way through. Azure Virtual Network, knowing the landscape of your virtual networks inside Azure. More often than not, I've seen so many people just run up a new VNet and duplicate IP address ranges and file rules, and all of this is costed, right? Every time you press a button, they make it really easy to deploy a highly available, scalable service in seconds that is costing you money in seconds. Azure resources, so literally everything that lives inside Azure, whether it's a resource group, whether it's a VM, whether it's a storage blob, whether it's a SQL database. Again, every single one of those things is costing you money. So knowing how many of those resources are out there, are they being used, how much are they costing you, is vitally important. And so that links into the last part of that conversation, is the billing capability of predictive billing, taking that data in real time or near real time to work out, hey, has someone set up some service for testing and left them on, and you come in Monday morning and I've got a massive bill or for the month before, or someone runs something for 2 weeks and I don't find out until the next sales cycle. Splunk makes it really good and really easy to ingest this data. We've got a whole bunch of apps and add-ons out there in the ecosystem to do exactly that. Everything from absolutely everywhere. So we make a couple of them ourselves, our customers, our partners, the community make these apps to ingest every kind of corner of the Azure world. It's simple, right? You know, just makes it really easy to ingest it. You know, how could you not know which one you would need, right? There is a lot out there. You can go through every single one of these and dial in the inputs, connect it up, and ingest that data, and every single one of those will bring in data for you. And if you've got a big enough license, why wouldn't you? That's great visibility, right? But if you do that, you might end up probably getting more than what you wish for. Don't laugh, I feel like this all the time. Having something like that and seeing all of that data come swarming in, and then going and trying to find that use case or that requirement or that needle in the haystack is more often than not much more difficult than it sounds. So what I wanted to do today, and the main reason that I wanted to show you this is because it is very, very simple. We've done a little bit of work, I say we, Jason Conger, I don't know if he's hanging around here, no he's not. He's put a lot of work into some of the add-on framework recently, but essentially it all boils down to these two. So the Splunk add-on for Microsoft Cloud Services, and again, this is Azure specific, we'll dig into the Office 365 stuff later. The Microsoft Cloud Services add-on is built and supported by Splunk. Very, very simple to connect and configure. And the Azure add-on for Splunk, if you've ever brought in any of the other data, so you've seen the Azure AD add-on, the inventory add-on, the billing add-on, there's a whole bunch out there. Jason has consolidated these down, so there is one specific add-on, and we'll show you what that looks like in a second. But at the end of the day, if you want to collect Azure data, these are the ones that you want. They both work basically exactly the same. Everything in Splunk in the Azure world requires an app registration. We have blog posts out there that detail step-by-step how to create those. Create the app registration, put your credentials in, select the inputs that you want, and you're off and running. You don't need 55 add-ons and 400 source types to work out what's happening. Those two will give you those core data sets that we're looking for, our Azure AD data, our VNet data, all the resource information, all the resource usage, the topology data, and more importantly, the billing and the usage information. As I said, and it might be a little bit hard to read, but the top one kind of focuses on the Azure management and audit side of the fence. So you'll see access to be able to pull data out of storage blobs and storage tables. So if you're looking after getting things like NSG flow logs, or you've got custom data sets that you log into Azure storage, that is the add-on that you get to go and drag that data in. Makes it very, very easy. Every single thing that comes out of those add-ons is in lovely, beautiful JSON format, which means that whoever builds it can't get it wrong, hopefully. Splunk reads it out of the box. All of those fields are extracted as a key value pair, which is awesome for us because we don't have to do those extractions. And it also means that if Microsoft make more information available, we don't have to update those add-ons to make that compatibility grow along with it. We don't have to create those knowledge objects to make those new events and fields work. And that's certainly something that I've noticed over the last 2 or 3 years, is that they continually expose more audit data and more analytics and more information to the end user, and so that data then just happens to be coming into Splunk, right? So bringing the data in is good. Knowing what data is also coming in is important as well. So if you've already got some of this data coming in and you've been solving a particular use case, go and have a hunt back through it, because chances are there is way more information in there that was potentially available to you when you first had a look at it. Again, the same thing. So the Azure add-on at the bottom consolidates a whole mountain of those previous add-ons that used to be separate. So you'd have to create an app registration and inputs across different boxes, which if you're in a distributed environment was particularly difficult. One of the really good things about that add-on is it also comes with Event Hub integration now as well. So if you're looking at that streaming capability and not having to use the add-ons to reach out into Azure and pull stuff back. We can use the Azure Event Hub capability to send stuff through the HTTP event collector. And again, it's all nice JSON, it's all very pretty. What does that mean? What can you do with it? And again, these are just things that I cooked up using the Frothly infrastructure that we built for Boss of the Sock, our brewery that we built along the way. This is the Azure resource data, right? So something as trivial as looking at the audit events and errors happening on some of those resources. And some of those errors and things could be innocuous, could be repetitive. Correlating that with outages and incidents is vitally important. Having the ability to see Kubernetes clusters and node pools being spun up or instances being destroyed and when they got destroyed and did we have outages and what that meant for the topology and things like that. Again, using the cloud services add-on, it's kind of the only two that you need, right? We're going to get so much value out of those without having to expand the environment to fit more in. Topology data, this was an interesting one. I was kind of looking through my list of resources and trying to, work out what I had. We had a bunch of different availability zones. We were running up stuff in the US zones. We were running them up in Australia, pretty much everywhere that we could find them. Using the topology data that the add-on generates to visualize your environment. So when you talk about a particular point in time for what your topology looks like, capacity planning or growth or capacity planning and things like that, this is a point in time snapshot of our test environment. And it was a little bit terrifying because I realized that I had much more stuff running than what I should have had running. Luckily, my boss is nice and let me expense that bill. But the really great thing about it is for those little things like, I wouldn't say little things, those dynamic Kubernetes clusters and containerized services, having that point in time to say when that instance existed and when it got torn down, we can do that because that data is constantly coming in. So at this point in time, that cluster had 3 instances, and then it was scaled out to 300 because we had a massive swarm on the website and then it got turned down, or we had a massive swarm on the website and we didn't scale up. Why didn't we scale up? And then going back and looking at the audit logs to see if there was issues or errors. All of this data is consumable right across the board and should be correlated together. After I did see this, I kind of went, I might be in a bit of trouble here. How much is this going to cost me? Billing insights, right? Near real time, we grab the data as fast as Microsoft make it available to us. But being able to take that data and work out what's costing me $4 an hour to run, or what have I left running over the weekend, or what have I been stress testing? What's my bill going to cost me at the end of the month if I don't turn this thing off? They are just fairly rudimentary tables and searches. From there, we can do advanced predictive analytics, capacity planning, customized dashboards that you give to end users, to say, here is my migration calculator. Hey, I want to build this app in Azure. How much is it going to cost me? All of that data is available to you. You've got access to your offer ID, which is going to tell you how much you pay for those sorts of service tiers, whether it's storage per 100 gig, whether it's transactions per 10,000, all of that is there to be able to go, here is what I've got, here is what it's going to cost me, or here is what I am spending, can I do it cheaper elsewhere? And obviously everything in dark mode this year because why not? These might be interesting, they might not be. I could have made 500 dashboards and just shown you pictures all afternoon, and you kind of would have looked at it and gone, oh my God, there's just a shit ton of data, I don't even know what to do with it, and we're back to where we started. As I said, the trick is to be really prescriptive and programmatic about your approach. Start with those use cases and what those requirements are. Is there a particular issue that's currently causing you pain? Is it a billing issue? Is it an uptime issue? Is it a capacity issue? Is your data center full and we're talking about a migration to cloud? Is it a availability and a high availability issue? How much is it going to cost me to scale this thing across 3 zones? All of that is there ready for you to consume. However, if we wanted to dial it all the way back and just focus on performance monitoring, uptime, SLA, things like that, we've got option 2. Option 2 is the Splunk app for infrastructure. But first, what I want to convey is that this session is not a Splunk app for infrastructure session. The guys that built this capability, and I will not steal their thunder, their session is on tomorrow. I thoroughly recommend you go and check out this session. This is all about SAI and multi-cloud monitoring. So if you've got a multi-cloud strategy and you're sitting here going, well, this is cool for Azure, but I've still got the other stuff to worry about. SAI is going to show you how to aggregate that information together using an interface that is extremely easy to configure and overlay those metrics together. So if I've got CPU and performance and uptime monitoring for Azure, I can correlate that and view that against AWS and GCP and things like that. So go and see that session. It's on at 11:15. It's not too early and it's not too late. They will blow your minds with how awesome that some of this stuff is. The onboarding process and the wizard built into the platform is amazing. Connecting to your Azure, allowing you to select, hey, I want this event hub, I want this resource group, I want to capture these entities. And that's all you've got to do. So it will then go out and talk back to your Azure, bring that data back in. This is metrics-driven data, so we're not pulling back all of the massive event data unless you want it. A lot of this is pure, nice, tiny metric, uptime, resource usage kind of data. Make sense? Office 365. For good reason, this section is a little smaller. Last year I spent a lot of time talking about Office 365. If you haven't seen that session, or if you have, those use cases and those requirements haven't really changed all that much. If you're not doing them, I recommend you go back and check out that session. There'll be a link in the back of this deck when you download it, when it's available. But all of those use cases around the audit information, this will dig into a little bit more that's been made available since. So Office 365, as we spoke about, is Microsoft's full SaaS offering. You've got hardly any access into the back end of this other than your admin centers, and there are a few admin centers because why have one admin center when you can have 16? I particularly like that I can spell my name in icons. I hope Splunk gets that big. Did have to use a fair bit of access though, which I'm not thrilled about. From a Splunk perspective, what is potentially accessible and valuable to you will depend completely on your subscriptions that you've got. If you've got enterprise licensing, you've got E3, E5s, or you've got something different, or free university licenses, you might have less, you might have more. And again, I won't pretend to show you everything. This is based on the data that I've seen from the customers that I've looked at data from and the subscription that I've got. So you might look at this and go, well, I've got more than him. And if you do, please come and see me. This has grown, so if you do see that deck from last year, things like Power Apps and a couple of other new ones that have popped in that weren't available last year. So again, if you're bringing this data in already, go and have a look to see what might be new since you last looked at it. The value of bringing this data in is not just from an IT ops and a monitoring perspective. As a SaaS service, you might not care about the monitoring side of something like a SaaS service. You pay for it to be online. You don't really care why it's slow. You just want them to pay for it. You want them to fix it. But the data that you've got coming in will be immensely reusable for security, for the business analytics teams, for the rest of the organisation, provided that you're open and willing to kind of share that view of the world. Bringing in Exchange data, looking at mailbox migrations, which we'll dig into in a little. Being able to see if people are adopting Office 365. It's not a trivial investment to go and lift and shift that workload across the board. Are people actually using it? You spend a lot of money to get OneDrive out there, fold home drive redirections out to OneDrive. Is it working? Are people using it? Are people storing all their torrents into OneDrive, and that's why your internet's slow? All of that data is in there for you to eyeball. Again, these are really hard to read, but you can see them in the deck if you download it. Everything is nice, clean JSON format. All of those auditable actions, again, aren't just a security audit requirement, a failed login. They are settings changes. They are people being added to groups, people being removed from groups. Someone rings up and says, hey, I don't have access to this file. Oh, we can see in Azure AD someone removed you. Changes to service principals. Every single kind of audit action in terms of Azure AD is in there. And again, this changed immensely in the last year or so. The number of audit events keeps growing. Exchange Online is always a fun one. We're not going to talk about message tracking logs. It's a very sore point, and I think at the moment there's some larger overall message tracking issues, but we'll see how we go. But the Exchange Online capacity, knowing the difference between someone receiving an email, someone deleting that email, so knowing that the email is in their trash can versus someone who's done a hard delete and it's actually gone for good. So that level of detail and that granularity is there. Access to attachments, people making settings changes. You get an executive rings up that says, hey, I can't get my iPad to work. That never happens, right? Execs are always the guinea pigs and the pilots for this sort of stuff. But being able to see, hey, you've gone in and changed all of these folder settings and now your emails aren't being stored remotely, locally, they're being shipped somewhere else. All of that granularity is in there. Same sort of thing. The number of events and auditable events in this is incredibly detailed, right down to file uploads and downloads, tweaks and changes, people accessing a file, people sharing a file, outside sharing out of the organisation. Could be a security issue, might be a monitoring and a troubleshooting issue. People can't access these sorts of things because OneDrive's not configured properly. If you're the cloud admin on your side of the fence, it might be your problem, it might be security. Again, it's that reusable data. SharePoint is amusingly the one that's grown the most. So when I ran this last year, there was about 50 of those audit events. There's nearly 90 of them. So in less than a year, the number of event information pieces that you can pull out of SharePoint Online has nearly doubled. But what does all that mean? If it's all just raw JSON data, does it mean I've got to go and build something and I've got to build a dashboard and make it look pretty and I've got to come up with these searches? I might not be that savvy with SPL and I just want something where I can put in my client ID and my key and I just want it to work. And so that is what the Microsoft Office 365 app for Splunk is for, is to present that high-level view of the world. And so the other back-end parts of this app do have a security focus to it because that was my background. But there is updates, if I can get them approved, that will come out for this app that have a whole bunch of infrastructure and monitoring use cases attached to them as well. But being able to see the landscape on a page to see, hey, how many users have we got signed in today? Or at 9 a.m., do I have all 4,000 of my employees? Or hey, it's 9 o'clock and I can only see 3 users logged in and I'm getting a whole bunch of tickets about authentication issues. Being able to correlate that with Azure AD Connect and your on-prem domain controllers to see, hey, is it a sync issue? I'm going and correlating that with my firewall traffic. Can I see my authentication request getting out? Certificate information. Are my certs expired and so I can't do my handshakes and that's why everyone's being rejected. That is the value of Splunk, is to reuse that data, not just for these single siloed points of view. Things like uptime and SLA monitoring. You like to think that Microsoft is so big that they can't fall. The proof is in the pudding. If you are bringing in the server status information, go and have a look. More often than not, it doesn't affect you, you don't notice it, but those events are logged. Being able to see a particular service in your tenant, if there is an issue, it will tell you out of the box which one is being affected, what the Microsoft ticket was created for, who's actually working on it, when the next update is due, and you can also see how many tenants are affected. Is it just you, or is it half the planet? Where things like this come in handy is on-prem remediation. So you get a whole bunch of people saying, I can't send emails. You spend 2 hours in a war room blaming the network guys because, it must be a network issue. Seeing it in here, and the story is because I had a customer and it happened to them. They spent 2 hours in a war room blaming each other before they got a hold of Microsoft and said, oh yeah, no, it's a Southeast exchange issue. We've got most of Australia offline. And so it was 2 hours of back and forth and 30 people in a room and screaming users to work out that it was nothing to do with them. So at the end of the day, if you can get that information faster, relay that to your end users, and then also stick the boot in for a 100% uptime service, then why not? The mailbox migration as an example, so you might still run on-premise mailboxes. You might have a project in play to go and migrate those. Full audit events to know, are these migrations happening? Are they working? Are they finished? And then capacity planning, right? So I got through 50 overnight, here's my next list, or you might script that up so that once those 50 are done, we'll keep adding them overnight until we get through them, and then we'll stop so that we make sure that people aren't affected during business hours. All of that is infinitely measurable, extremely valuable. Permission modifications, so if you've got shared mailboxes and you've got to configure those, seeing that those changes are being made successfully and users can connect is also very important. Next steps. So as I said, the Office 365 stuff, I didn't want to just kind of rehash the same information. Those decks are out there, they're kind of sequential. Go and check them out. There is a mountain of collateral. There'll be in the back of this Git access links to blog posts, white papers, GitHub repos. This is designed to be something to keep your attention. Hopefully I have at 10 to 5. But also to give you that idea to say, right, well, this is a deck that I can get and it has everything and the links in one place to go and take those next steps, or see if this is a use case that I have data for, or if it's something I need data for. Again, it's about being really programmatic about our approach and not just sucking in every single thing that's available to us because I can, but choosing those battles to make sure that we're getting the best bang for buck out of our investment. Splunk is licensed on the amount of data that you bring in, right? So if you're bringing the data in and no one's using it, it's not really valuable. If you're bringing the data in once and 10 different teams are using it, then it's immensely valuable, and there's also opportunities to go and annoy those teams to help pay for Splunk too. Some other sessions, so if you want to see the security side of this conversation, that is on tomorrow. The fundamentals track, so myself and Jason are going to run through some very basic use cases. We're actually going to get hands on keyboards and show some demos around those billing analytics and those SLA predictions and capacity planning and things like that. And then of course, the SAI track, which I thoroughly recommend you go and check out, is something that will probably blow your mind, because if you haven't seen it, it is not just cloud, it is pretty much, as the name suggests, everything to do with infrastructure in a very neat and consumable format. Other than that, I will give you 7 minutes of your day back. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to take questions or come and annoy me afterwards, but thank you very much.